Chapter 1. The Ghost Operator. John Baxter crouched behind a concrete barrier in the bombed-out streets of Kandahar, his weathered face scanning the compound through night vision goggles. At 38, he was a legend among Special Operations Forces, a man who completed impossible missions and eliminated high-value targets with surgical precision. His kill count was classified, but whispers in military circles spoke of numbers that would make seasoned warriors uncomfortable. Phantom 6, this is Control, crackled through his earpiece. Target confirmed in Building Alpha. You are cleared to paint. John's calloused fingers wrapped around the laser target designator, a device that would guide a Hellfire missile to its destination with pinpoint accuracy. 20 years of military service had taught him that hesitation was the enemy of success. Every target eliminated meant American soldiers went home alive. But John Baxter hadn't always been a killing machine. 5 years ago, he'd been a different man, a husband to Renee Hendricks and father to little Emma Baxter. The divorce had been Renee's idea, claiming she couldn't handle the stress of military life, the deployments, the constant fear of losing him. She'd taken Emma and moved back to Colorado, starting fresh while John buried himself deeper into black operations. Daddy calls every night. Emma had told him during their last video chat 3 weeks ago, her innocent 8-year-old face beaming through the laptop screen. But Mommy says you're too busy fighting bad guys to come visit. John had promised to take leave soon, to spend real time with his daughter instead of these stolen moments between missions. Emma was the only person left in the world who could make him smile genuinely. The only connection to the man he used to be before the military turned him into something harder, colder, more efficient. His phone buzzed with a text from his handler, Kirk Holt. New priority target identified. Extend deployment by 2 weeks. John typed back, negative. Taking leave as scheduled. Not negotiable, Phantom 6. National security priority. John stared at the message, then at the photo of Emma he kept tucked inside his tactical vest. She was holding a drawing she'd made of him in his uniform, complete with medals and a big smile. The innocence in her eyes reminded him why he fought, to protect people like her from the monsters that lurked in the world's shadows. But sometimes the line between protector and monster became blurred in the darkness of foreign battlefields. Control, Phantom 6. Beginning target designation. As John raised the laser designator, his mind wandered to simpler times. Renee had been beautiful when they'd met at a military ball. Blonde hair, bright smile, and an infectious laugh that could light up any room. She'd been working as a nurse at the base hospital, drawn to his quiet intensity and the danger that surrounded him like a second skin. Their courtship had been a whirlwind of stolen moments between deployments. Renee claimed she loved his dedication to duty, his unwavering moral compass, his protective nature. But as the years passed and the missions became more classified, more violent, she began to see something in his eyes that frightened her. You're different when you come back, she'd said during one of their final arguments. Colder, more distant. It's like you leave part of yourself on those battlefields. She wasn't wrong. Each mission required John to compartmentalize his humanity, to become the efficient killer that kept America safe. The transition back to husband and father became increasingly difficult as his body count rose and his methods became more ruthless. The divorce papers had arrived while John was eliminating a terrorist cell in Syria. By the time he returned stateside, Renee had already moved to Colorado Springs with Emma, claiming she needed distance from military life to heal and start over. You can see Emma whenever you want, Renee had promised. I'm not trying to keep her from you. I just can't be married to someone who scares me. John had agreed to the divorce without contest, knowing that Renee was probably right to fear what he'd become. But Emma remained his anchor to humanity, the one person who could still see the good man buried beneath layers of justified violence. His secure satellite phone rang, interrupting his target designation. The caller ID showed Emma's number, which was unusual. She typically called on scheduled video chats, not during his operational hours. John activated his throat mic. Control, Phantom 6. Taking priority communication. Stand by. He answered the phone, expecting to hear Emma's cheerful voice asking about his latest adventure. Instead, he was greeted by heart-wrenching sobs and a voice thick with pain and terror. The laser designator suddenly felt weightless in his hands as his daughter's broken voice shattered his world. Chapter 2. The New Family. 3 months earlier, Renee Hendricks had been arranging flowers in the kitchen of her Colorado Springs home when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, she saw a handsome man in an expensive suit, tall, dark-haired, with the kind of confident smile that had always been her weakness. "Mrs. Baxter," he'd said when she opened the door. "I'm Darren Lockwood, your new neighbor. I wanted to introduce myself and see if you needed help with anything." Darren had moved into the house across the street 2 weeks prior, and Renee had noticed him working in his yard, always seeming to time his outdoor activities with her comings and goings. He was attractive in a way that John had never been. Polished, sophisticated, with none of the dangerous edge that had ultimately driven her away from her ex-husband. "It's actually Hendricks now," she'd corrected, smiling despite herself. "I went back to my maiden name after the divorce." "Ah, recent divorce?" Darren's expression had been sympathetic, understanding. "I went through one myself last year. It's tough, especially with kids involved." Over coffee that afternoon, Renee had found herself opening up to this charming stranger. Darren claimed to be a pharmaceutical sales representative, traveling frequently, but recently relocated to Colorado for a more stable lifestyle. He was attentive, funny, and seemed genuinely interested in both her and Emma. "Your ex-husband's military?" Darren had asked, noting the framed photo of John in dress uniform that Renee kept on the mantel for Emma's sake. "Special operations. He's intense. The kind of man who solves problems with violence first and questions later." Darren's eyes had gleamed with interest. "Sounds dangerous. That's why I left. I couldn't live with someone who scared me, even if he claimed everything he did was to protect us." What Renee didn't know was that Darren Lockwood wasn't a pharmaceutical salesman. His real name was Darren Lockwood, but his profession was far more sinister. He was a freelance intelligence broker who sold military secrets to the highest bidder, regardless of nationality or ideology. His move to Colorado Springs hadn't been coincidental. He'd been specifically hunting for connections to high-value military targets. John Baxter's classified record had made him a priority acquisition. The man's access to special operations intelligence, his knowledge of terrorist networks, and his tactical expertise were worth millions to the right buyers. But John was notoriously difficult to approach directly. His paranoid security measures and violent reputation made him nearly untouchable. Renee, however, was a different story. A lonely divorcee with a young daughter, desperate for companionship and security. Darren had spent weeks studying her routine, her preferences, her vulnerabilities before making his approach. The courtship had been calculated and methodical. Flowers delivered when Renee was feeling overwhelmed by single motherhood. Expensive dinners at restaurants she'd mentioned wanting to try. Gifts for Emma that showed he was paying attention to her interests. Within 2 months, Darren had moved in. Within 3, he and Renee were discussing marriage. "Emma seems to like you," Renee had said one evening as they watched the little girl play in the backyard. "She's a special kid. Smart, like her father, I imagine." Renee's expression had darkened slightly. "John's intelligent, but he's also dangerous. I worry about what Emma might inherit from him, such as his temper, his inability to back down from a fight, his complete lack of mercy when someone crosses him." Renee had shuddered slightly. "I've seen what he's capable of when he feels betrayed." Darren had made mental notes of every detail. John Baxter's psychological profile was crucial for what came next: the systematic extraction of intelligence through his daughter and ex-wife. The process had started small. Casual questions about John's deployment schedule, his recent missions, his contacts within the military hierarchy. Renee didn't know much about the classified details, but she knew enough to paint a picture of John's current operations. When Emma video chatted with her father, Darren would listen from another room, recording the conversations and analyzing them for useful intelligence. The little girl was surprisingly observant, often repeating things John had mentioned about his location, his teammates, his upcoming missions. "Daddy says he's in a really hot place with lots of sand," Emma had reported after one call. "And he's working with someone named Kirk who gives him special jobs." Darren had immediately researched Kirk Holt, discovering the man's role as a handler for black operations. The intelligence was valuable, but Darren needed more. Direct access to John's operational details, his mission parameters, his target lists. That's when the psychological manipulation began in earnest. Emma's father called again last night. Darren had mentioned to Renee after a particularly long video chat. She always seems upset after talking to him. Upset how? Anxious. Withdrawn. Like she's carrying secrets she's too young to understand. Renee had begun monitoring Emma's calls more closely, asking probing questions about what she and her father discussed. Each piece of information was passed along to Darren, who compiled detailed intelligence reports for his foreign contacts. But as the months passed, Darren grew impatient with the slow trickle of information. His buyers were demanding more detailed intelligence, real-time operational data that could only come from direct access to John's communications or personal effects. That's when Darren made his fatal mistake. He decided to use force. Emma needs to understand that her real family is here now, he told Renee one evening. All this contact with her father is preventing her from moving on. I can't cut John out of Emma's life completely. He's her father. He's a killer who abandoned his family for his precious military career. Emma deserves better. The arguments had escalated over the following weeks, with Darren becoming increasingly controlling and manipulative. He'd begun isolating Renee from her friends, monitoring her communications, and making subtle threats about what might happen if she didn't cooperate with his demands for information about John. But Emma had remained loyal to her father, refusing to share details about their conversations or to accept Darren as a replacement parent. Her resistance had triggered something dark in Darren's personality, a violent streak that he'd kept carefully hidden during his manipulation campaign. The first incident had been a slap across Emma's face when she'd refused to call him dad. The second had been a twisted arm when she'd tried to hide during one of John's scheduled calls. But last week, when Emma had defiantly told Darren that her real father was coming home soon to visit, his mask had finally slipped completely. Now, as Renee worked late at the hospital, unaware of what was happening in her own home, Darren stood in the garage with a carpenter's hammer in his hand and a terrified 8-year-old girl tied to a chair. "Time to call Daddy," he said with a smile that would have made seasoned soldiers flinch. "Let's see how tough he really is when someone he loves is in danger." Chapter 3. The Call. I was painting a target for a drone strike when the call came in. The laser designator held steady on the compound's main building as John waited for confirmation from the drone operator, but Emma's number appearing on his satellite phone immediately shifted his priorities. Control, Phantom 6. Hold strike, authorization. Priority communication incoming. Negative, Phantom 6. Target window closing in 60 seconds. John ignored the command and answered his phone, expecting Emma's usual cheerful greeting. Instead, her voice hit him like a sniper's bullet to the chest. It was my 8-year-old daughter screaming, "Daddy, I'm in the hospital. My stepfather broke my fingers one by one with a hammer." The laser designator slipped from John's suddenly nerveless fingers as Emma's agonized sobs filled his earpiece. 20 years of combat experience, countless life-or-death situations, and nothing had ever prepared him for the sound of his daughter's torture. She was sobbing. John could hear her whimpering through the phone, each breath a struggle against pain and terror. "Emma, sweetheart, where are you? Are you safe now?" "I'm in the hospital, Daddy. The doctors say some of my fingers might not work right anymore." Her voice broke on the last words, dissolving into heartbroken sobs that tore through John's chest like shrapnel. "Phantom 6, you are ordered to complete the mission." Kirk Holt's voice crackled through his tactical radio, but John was beyond caring about orders or consequences. "Emma, baby, listen to me. You're safe now, okay? The doctors are going to take care of you, and Daddy's coming home." He said if I told anyone what really happened, he'd hurt Mommy too. Emma's voice dropped to a terrified whisper. "But I had to call you, Daddy. I had to." Before John could respond, the phone was apparently taken from Emma. A man's voice came on the line, confident, mocking, with the tone of someone who believed he held all the cards. "Tell your soldier daddy I'm coming for him next." The voice was unfamiliar, but John committed every inflection to memory. He would recognize that voice anywhere now. And when he found its owner, the man would discover what 20 years of special operations training could do to human anatomy. I put the target painter down, cold as ice. The emotional shock was already crystallizing into something far more dangerous. The predatory calm that made John Baxter one of the most feared operators in American military service. "Sweetie, Daddy's coming home to teach that fool a lesson. Promise?" Emma's voice was small, broken, but carried a note of hope that stabbed John's heart. "I promise, baby. Daddy's going to fix everything." The line went dead, leaving John staring at his phone in the sudden silence of the Afghan hillside. Around him, the war continued, distant explosions, radio chatter, the mechanical whine of surveillance drones. But John's world had narrowed to a single, crystalline focus. Whoever had hurt his daughter was going to die slowly and painfully. "Phantom 6, respond immediately." Kirkholt's voice was sharp with authority. "You have abandoned your mission parameters without authorization." John activated his throat mic, his voice carrying a tone that made his handler pause mid-sentence. "Kirk, I need immediate extraction and transport to Colorado Springs. My daughter's been tortured by her stepfather." "That's not how this works, John. You have a job to finish." "The job's finished." John stood and began walking away from his position, leaving behind millions of dollars in tactical equipment and a high-priority target that would now require an entirely new operation to eliminate. "Either you give me transport home, or I'll find my own way. But I'm leaving Afghanistan in the next 6 hours, with or without military approval." There was a long pause before Kirk responded, and when he did, his voice carried a note of careful concern. John Baxter was too valuable an asset to lose over a family crisis, but he was also too dangerous to directly oppose when his daughter's safety was at stake. "Stand by for extraction coordinates. We'll have you on a transport within 4 hours. 2 hours. John, be reasonable." "Kirk." John's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but it carried more menace than any shouted threat. "My 8-year-old daughter called me while someone was breaking her fingers with a hammer. Reasonable died with that phone call. 2 hours, or I disappear and handle this my own way." Another pause. "Extraction in 2 hours. But John, whatever you're planning, remember that you're still bound by U.S. law when you're on American soil." John almost laughed at the absurdity of the statement. For 20 years, he'd operated in legal gray areas, eliminating threats to American security through methods that would horrify civilian courts. The idea that domestic law would constrain him when his daughter's torturer was still breathing was beyond naive. "Sure, Kirk. I'll keep that in mind." As John began the trek to his extraction point, his mind was already shifting into mission planning mode. Darren Lockwood. He'd heard Renee mention the name during their last conversation about her new relationship. The man who'd moved in with his ex-wife and daughter. The pharmaceutical salesman who'd seemed too good to be true. John had been suspicious from the beginning, but had restrained himself, knowing that Renee had the right to move on with her life. Emma had seemed happy enough with her new stepfather, and John had no legal grounds to interfere with his ex-wife's choices. But this changed everything. Darren Lockwood had crossed a line that separated civilization from barbarism, and John Baxter was uniquely qualified to demonstrate the consequences of that choice. During the helicopter ride to Bagram Air Base, John began gathering intelligence on his target. His military-issued laptop had access to databases that most law enforcement agencies could only dream of: financial records, travel history, communication intercepts, even psychological profiles compiled by government analysts. What he found about Darren Lockwood was troubling in ways that went far beyond child abuse. The man's cover story was elaborate but ultimately false. Bank accounts funded through shell companies, a travel history that coincided with intelligence breaches, communication patterns that suggested professional espionage activities. John's blood went cold as the implications became clear. This wasn't a random case of domestic violence. Darren Lockwood was a spy who targeted John's family specifically, using Renee and Emma as assets in whatever intelligence operation he was running. The torture of Emma hadn't been a momentary loss of control. It had been a calculated move to provoke John, to force him to abandon his mission and return home, where Lockwood could better monitor and manipulate him. By the time John's transport touched down at Colorado Springs, He understood exactly what he was dealing with. Not just a child abuser who needed to be stopped, but a foreign operative who declared war on John's family as part of a larger intelligence operation. Darren Lockwood had made the fatal mistake of believing that John Baxter would respond to this provocation with conventional law enforcement methods. Police reports, custody hearings, legal proceedings that could be manipulated and prolonged. Instead, he was about to discover that some problems required more direct solutions, and John Baxter had been solving problems directly for 20 years. The war in Afghanistan would have to wait. John had a new mission now, one that would be conducted on American soil against an enemy who'd made the unforgivable error of hurting his daughter. And unlike his overseas operations, this mission would be personal. Chapter 4. The Hunter Returns. Children's Hospital Colorado felt like a battlefield to John as he strode through the sterile corridors, still wearing his tactical pants and combat boots from the extraction flight. Nurses and security guards stepped aside instinctively. Something in his bearing, his predatory focus, warned them that this was not a man to impede. Emma's room was in the pediatric wing, guarded by a single police officer who looked up nervously as John approached. "Sir, I need to see some identification. I'm her father." John's voice carried an edge that made the officer's hand move instinctively toward his weapon. "Move." The officer, a 20-something rookie named Bobby Fletcher, had been briefed about Emma's situation, but not about her father's background. What he saw was a dangerous-looking man with killer's eyes demanding access to a child victim. "Sir, I'm going to need you to calm down and show me." John's military ID was suddenly in the officer's face, along with credentials that made Bobby's eyes widen. Special Operations Command, classified clearance levels, and enough commendations to outfit a small army. "Jesus," Bobby whispered. "Your special forces?" Something like that. John pushed past the officer and entered Emma's room, his heart clenching at what he saw. His 8-year-old daughter lay in a hospital bed, her right hand wrapped in bulky bandages that couldn't hide the unnatural angles of her fingers. Her face was pale with shock and pain, but her eyes lit up when she saw him. "Daddy." Emma tried to sit up, then winced as the movement jarred her injured hand. John was beside her bed in 2 quick strides, gently embracing her while being careful not to disturb her injuries. "I'm here, baby. Daddy's here now. I knew you'd come." Emma's voice was small but determined. "I told him you'd come for me." "Where's your mother?" "Mommy's talking to the doctors. She's been crying a lot." Emma's expression grew troubled. "She didn't know, Daddy. She was at work when he hurt me." John felt a cold rage building in his chest, but he kept his voice gentle for Emma's sake. "Can you tell me what happened, sweetheart?" Emma's story came out in halting, painful fragments. Darren had been asking her questions about John's work, his deployments, his phone calls. When Emma had refused to share details, Darren's requests had become demands, then threats. He said if I didn't help him, something bad would happen to Mommy. "But I couldn't tell him about your secret work, Daddy. You said never to tell anyone about the special things you do." John's hands clenched in a fist as Emma described the escalating abuse, isolation, verbal threats, and finally the systematic torture that had left her fingers broken and possibly permanently damaged. "He used a hammer from the garage," Emma whispered. "He said each finger I didn't tell him about your work would get broken. I made it to 3 before." She started crying again. John held her carefully, his mind already calculating trajectories, timelines, and kill zones. Darren Lockwood had tortured a child to extract military intelligence. By any definition of the word, that made him an enemy combatant engaged in hostile operations against American interests. "Mr. Baxter?" John turned to see a woman in scrubs entering the room, Dr. Catherine Hart, according to her name tag. Her expression was professionally sympathetic, but carried an underlying tension. "I'm Dr. Hart, Emma's surgeon. I need to discuss her prognosis with you." John gently squeezed Emma's uninjured hand. "I'll be right back, baby." In the hallway, Dr. Hart's professional demeanor cracked slightly. "Mr. Baxter, I've been a pediatric surgeon for 15 years, and I've never seen deliberate injuries this precise. Whoever did this knew exactly how much force to apply to break bones without causing life-threatening damage." "What are you saying?" I'm saying this wasn't a crime of passion or a moment of lost control. This was systematic torture conducted by someone with knowledge of human anatomy. Dr. Hart's voice dropped. Emma may never regain full use of her right hand. The damage to the small bones and ligaments is extensive. John felt something cold and final settle in his chest. Darren Lockwood hadn't just abused his daughter. He'd potentially crippled her for life. Where's my ex-wife? Mrs. Hendricks is in the family counseling room with a police detective handling the case. Room 302. John found Renee in a small conference room, sitting across from Detective Andre Jefferson, a middle-aged black man with tired eyes. Renee looked up when John entered, her face streaked with tears and guilt. John, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. Where is he? John's voice was flat, emotionless. Detective Jefferson looked up from his notepad. Mr. Baxter, I'm Detective Jefferson. I need to ask you some questions about. Where is Darren Lockwood? We have an APB out for his arrest, but he's disappeared. Left town sometime last night after the incident. John turned to Renee, his eyes boring into hers. Tell me everything about him. Everything. Renee's story tumbled out. Meeting Darren, their whirlwind courtship, his gradual integration into their family life. But as she spoke, John began picking up details that painted a different picture than the grieving mother realized. He asked a lot of questions about your work, Renee admitted. I thought he was just trying to understand why our marriage failed. What kind of questions? About your deployments, your security clearance, your contacts in the military. He seemed really interested in your friend Kirk. John exchanged a look with Detective Jefferson, who was also beginning to understand that this case was more complex than simple domestic abuse. Mrs. Hendricks, Jefferson said carefully, did Mr. Lockwood ever ask you to obtain specific information about your ex-husband's activities? Not directly, but Renee's face went pale as the implications hit her. Oh God, he was using me, wasn't he? Using Emma. John's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Your daughter screams beautifully. Want to hear more? Meet me at the old steel mill on Industrial Drive. Come alone, or she won't be the only one who gets hurt. John showed the message to Detective Jefferson, whose expression grew grim. This guy's escalating fast. We need to call in federal support, FBI, maybe even military intelligence if he's really a foreign operative. No. John's voice was final. This stays local for now. Mr. Baxter, I understand you're upset, but... John's stare made the detective's words die in his throat. Detective Jefferson, what do you know about my military service? Jefferson glanced at the credentials John had shown earlier. Special operations, classified missions. Why? Because you're about to have a choice. You can either trust me to handle this my way, or you can file reports and hold hearings while Darren Lockwood disappears forever. John leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. How many child torturers have you successfully prosecuted, detective? That's not the point. It's exactly the point. Your system is designed for criminals who follow rules, who could be reasoned with, who respond to conventional law enforcement. Darren Lockwood is a trained intelligence operative who tortured my daughter to extract military secrets. Your handcuffs and court dates won't stop him. Detective Jefferson stared at John for a long moment, recognizing something in the man's eyes that he'd seen in war veterans. The cold certainty of someone who'd killed before and would kill again if necessary. What are you planning? I'm planning to solve this problem permanently. John stood and headed for the door, but Renee's voice stopped him. John, please. I know you're angry, but don't do anything that'll take you away from Emma permanently. She needs her father. John turned back to his ex-wife, his expression softening slightly. Emma needs to know that the people who hurt her face consequences. Real consequences. As John left the hospital, he was already planning his approach to the abandoned steel mill. Darren Lockwood thought he was luring a grieving father into a trap, but he was actually about to face 20 years' worth of military training and control violence. The hunter had returned home, and the prey was about to discover why John Baxter's enemies rarely survived their first encounter with him. Chapter 5. The Trap Within a Trap. The abandoned Pueblo Steel Works sat like a monument to industrial decay on the outskirts of Colorado Springs, its rusted skeleton silhouetted against the afternoon sky. John parked his rental car 2 blocks away and approached on foot, moving with the fluid stealth that had kept him alive through countless hostile encounters. His tactical assessment was automatic: multiple entry points, excellent sight lines for snipers, countless hiding spots for ambushes. Darren Lockwood had chosen well, but he'd made one critical error. He was facing an opponent who'd been fighting in worse terrain for 2 decades. John's gear was minimal but deadly effective: a suppressed Glock 19, tactical knife, zip ties, and a small kit of interrogation tools that officially didn't exist in any military inventory. He'd acquired everything during a quick stop at a storage unit he maintained for exactly these kinds of off-books operations. As he circled the facility, John's phone buzzed with intelligence updates from Kirkholt. His handler had been busy during the flight back to Colorado, pulling every available resource to identify Darren Lockwood's real background and objectives. The information was disturbing in its implications. Darren Lockwood was indeed a professional intelligence broker, but his client list read like a who's who of America's enemies: Russian FSB, Chinese MSS, Iranian MOAS, and several terrorist organizations that John had personally disrupted during overseas operations. More troubling, Lockwood's financial records showed recent large payments from sources connected to the very terrorist cell John had been tracking in Afghanistan. The timing wasn't coincidental. Someone had specifically contracted Lockwood to neutralize John Baxter by targeting his family. Emma's torture hadn't been random violence or even intelligence gathering. It had been a calculated psychological warfare operation designed to bring John home and compromise his operational effectiveness. Every scream, every broken bone had been part of a larger strategy to destroy him emotionally and professionally. John felt his famous cold rage crystallizing into something even more dangerous: the absolute certainty that Darren Lockwood represented an existential threat that required permanent elimination. He entered the steel mill through a partially collapsed loading dock, moving through the shadows with practiced silence. The facility was a maze of rusted machinery, collapsed walkways, and debris that provided excellent concealment for both hunter and prey. "I wondered when you'd show up," Darren's voice echoed through the cavernous space. "Though I expected it to take longer. You military types usually follow protocols, file reports, wait for backup." John remained silent, using the sound of Darren's voice to triangulate his position while moving closer through the industrial maze. "Your daughter's quite the little soldier," Darren continued, his voice carrying a mocking tone that made John's grip tighten on his weapon. "Took 3 broken fingers before she started talking. I was impressed. Most adults break after the first one." John had located the sound source: a catwalk about 30 feet above the main floor, accessible through a series of ladders and maintenance walkways. But something felt wrong about the positioning, too obvious for a professional operator. "Of course, she didn't actually give me much useful information," Darren's voice continued. "Just repeated the same generic details about Daddy's important work. But her screams, those were very informative indeed." John froze as he realized the tactical situation. Darren's voice was coming from speakers positioned throughout the facility. He wasn't actually in the building at all, or if he was, his real position was completely different from where his voice seemed to originate. This was more than an ambush. It was a sophisticated intelligence operation designed to capture or kill John while maintaining plausible deniability. The abandoned steel mill wasn't Darren's trap. It was a kill box set up by professionals with significant resources and planning time. John's tactical radio crackled with an encrypted transmission. "Phantom 6, this is Overwatch. You have multiple hostiles converging on your position. This is not a solo operation." The voice belonged to Ollie O'Brien, one of John's former team members who now worked private security. Someone had activated John's emergency contact network, calling in favors that had been accumulating for years. "Ollie, what's your position?" "Northeast corner with Zach Walton and Edgar Davenport. We've been tracking unusual activity around this location for the past 6 hours. Your boy Lockwood brought friends, at least 8 operators with military-grade equipment." John smiled grimly. Darren had made another tactical error. He'd assumed John would come alone, driven by paternal rage and emotional compromise. Instead, he was facing a coordinated response from some of the deadliest men America had ever produced. Identification on the hostiles. Mixed bag. Zach's voice came through the radio. Some Russian Spetsnaz, couple of Chinese operators, and what looks like local contractors. Professional grade, but not expecting resistance. John moved toward a central position that would give him multiple escape routes while maintaining communication with his team. Rules of engagement. Your daughter, your call. Edgar's voice was flat, emotionless. We're here to support whatever you decide. For a moment, John felt something like his old humanity stirring. Gratitude for the brotherhood that had brought these men to his aid without question or hesitation. But that warmth was quickly consumed by the cold fire of his rage. Darren Lockwood dies tonight. Everyone else is secondary targets unless they interfere. Copy that. Beginning perimeter sweep. John's phone buzzed with another message from Darren. Enjoying the reunion? Your military friends won't help when your ex-wife and daughter start disappearing one by one. This is bigger than you understand, soldier boy. The attached photo made John's blood freeze. Emma's hospital room, taken from outside the window, with crosshairs digitally overlaid on her sleeping form. Ollie, I need immediate security at Children's Hospital. Someone's targeting Emma. Already done. Neil Bowers and Carlton Burke are on site with full tactical gear. Your daughter's covered. John felt a predatory satisfaction as the tactical situation shifted in his favor. Darren had expected to face a grieving father driven by emotion and desperation. Instead, he was dealing with a coordinated military operation conducted by men who'd spent decades perfecting the art of violence. But this was still personal. John wanted Darren Lockwood alive long enough to understand exactly what kind of mistake he'd made when he chose to torture an 8-year-old girl. The hunt was about to begin, and by the end of the night, Darren Lockwood would discover why John Baxter's enemies rarely survived their encounters with him. The difference was that this time, John wasn't constrained by rules of engagement or political considerations. This time, it was purely personal, and personal was how John Baxter did his best work. Chapter 6, Blood and Steel. The first hostile died quietly, John's tactical knife sliding between his ribs as the man tried to flank through the industrial maze. John caught the body before it could make noise, dragging it into shadows while relieving the corpse of weapons and communication equipment. Russian Spetsnaz, just as Ollie had reported. The gear was top-tier military issue, which confirmed that this wasn't some freelance operation. Darren Lockwood had serious backing from foreign intelligence services. John's earpiece crackled with updates from his team. Phantom 6, we have visual on the primary target. He's in a mobile command center about 200 meters south of your position, coordinating the sweep teams. How many operators inside the kill zone? 8 confirmed, possibly more in reserve positions. They're using standard search and destroy protocols. Systematic grid sweep with overlapping fields of fire. John smiled coldly. Search and destroy tactics worked well against conventional targets, but they assumed the prey would behave predictably. John Baxter had been surprising enemies for 20 years. He activated a small explosive charge he'd planted near the facility's main electrical panel. The blast cut power to the building, plunging the steel mill into darkness while simultaneously masking his position. In the sudden blackness, John became something more dangerous than human, a predator perfectly adapted to his environment. His night vision goggles turned the industrial maze into a clear tactical playground, while his enemies stumbled through unfamiliar territory. The second kill came as 2 operators tried to coordinate through the darkness. John's suppressed Glock coughed twice, the subsonic rounds punching through tactical vests with surgical precision. Both men dropped without making a sound. Contact lost with Team 2. Darren's voice crackled through the stolen radio. Switch to infrared and tighten the search pattern. John was already moving, using the facility's network of conveyor belts and maintenance tunnels to stay ahead of the search teams. He'd studied the building's blueprints during his approach, memorizing every access point and potential choke point. His phone buzzed with a message from Kirkholt. John, federal agencies are mobilizing to support your operation, but you need to maintain legal boundaries. Whatever you're planning, make sure it can be justified in congressional hearings. John almost laughed at the absurdity. Congressional hearings seemed irrelevant when foreign operators were trying to kill him and threatening his daughter. Some problems required solutions that existed outside legal frameworks. The third kill was more challenging. A sniper positioned in the facility's overhead crane assembly, covering the main approach routes with a high-powered rifle. John had to climb 40 feet of rusted steel framework to reach the man's position, moving with absolute silence while debris rained down from corroded support beams. The sniper never saw him coming. John's knife found the base of the man's skull, severing the spinal cord instantly. He acquired the sniper rifle and turned it on the remaining search teams, watching their thermal signatures through the weapon's advanced optics. Team leader down. Darren's voice carried increasing tension. All units converge on the crane position. We have Baxter isolated. But John was already gone. Using a zip line, he'd improvised from steel cable to descend to the facility's lower level. The remaining operators rushed toward his former position while he circled behind them, turning their own tactics against them. The fourth and fifth kills came simultaneously, two men covering each other's advance through a narrow corridor between machinery. John's improvised explosive device, constructed from cleaning chemicals found in the facility's maintenance areas, created a controlled collapse that crushed both operators under several tons of steel debris. "This is impossible." Darren's voice had lost its earlier confidence. "He's one man against a full tactical team." "Not quite." Ollie O'Brien's voice cut through the radio frequency. "You're facing the man who's been hunting your kind for 20 years. And he's not alone." Explosions echoed through the facility as John's team began their own assault on the perimeter positions. Zach Walton's expertise with demolitions turned the mobile command center into a fireball, while Edgar Davenport's sniper rifle began systematically eliminating the reserve forces. John used the chaos to close with his primary objective, Darren Lockwood himself. The man had abandoned his command vehicle and was fleeing through the facility's rear exit, but John knew the terrain better and had anticipated the escape route. He intercepted Darren at the loading dock where he'd entered, emerging from shadows like a vengeful spirit. Darren spun around, raising a pistol with professional competence, but John was already inside his firing arc. The disarm was textbook special operations, a precise strike that shattered Darren's wrist while simultaneously securing his weapon. Darren crashed to the concrete, clutching his ruined hand and staring up at John with a mixture of pain and disbelief. "You can't do this," Darren gasped. "I'm an American citizen. I have rights." John knelt beside the injured man, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "You tortured my 8-year-old daughter to extract military intelligence. You forfeited your rights when you became an enemy combatant. The courts will never. There won't be any courts." John's tactical knife appeared in his hand, the blade catching reflected light from the burning command vehicle. "You wanted to meet the man who raised Emma Baxter. Now you're going to discover what kind of father she has." Darren's eyes widened with the understanding that he wasn't going to survive the next few minutes. "Wait, I can give you information, names, contacts, the entire network that hired me. I already have that information." John's smile was arctic. "My people have been dismantling your operation while you're playing games in this steel mill. Your handlers, your contacts, your financial networks, all of it's been compromised. Then what do you want?" John leaned closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "I want you to understand what happens to people who hurt my family. I want you to know exactly why crossing John Baxter was the last mistake you'll ever make." The interrogation lasted 30 minutes and yielded intelligence that would result in the elimination of 3 separate foreign intelligence networks. By the time John was finished, Darren Lockwood had provided enough information to prevent dozens of future operations against American targets. But more importantly, he had experienced the same helpless terror that he'd inflicted on Emma, the understanding that mercy wasn't coming, that his suffering served a larger purpose, and that his fate had been sealed the moment he chose to harm an innocent child. When John finally ended Darren's life, it was with the clinical efficiency of a professional soldier completing a necessary mission. There was no satisfaction in the kill, no emotional catharsis, just the cold completion of a task that had to be done. As emergency vehicles converged on the steel mill, John and his team melted away into the Colorado night. Official reports would describe a gang-related shooting that resulted in multiple casualties, with no surviving witnesses to complicate the narrative. But John Baxter knew the truth. Justice had been served, his daughter was safe, and a message had been sent to anyone else who might consider targeting his family. Some problems required legal solutions. Others required permanent ones. And John Baxter had always been very good at permanent solutions. Chapter 7. Cleaning House. The secure briefing room at Peterson Air Force Base hummed with tension as John sat across from a collection of officials who represented the full spectrum of American intelligence and law enforcement. FBI Deputy Director Mike Brock, CIA Section Chief Carl Cooper, and Military Intelligence Colonel Dustin Rogers had convened an emergency session to address what they were officially calling the Colorado Springs incident. 11 dead foreign operatives. Deputy Director Brock began, reading from a classified report. 3 destroyed vehicles, 1 demolished steel mill, and enough weapons to outfit a small army. All traced back to a domestic dispute involving your daughter. John remained silent, his expression neutral. 24 hours had passed since the steel mill operation, and he'd spent the time ensuring Emma's security while allowing official channels to process the aftermath. The evidence suggests a coordinated attack by hostile intelligence services, Colonel Rogers continued. Russian Spetsnaz, Chinese military intelligence, Iranian operatives, and several contractors with ties to terrorist organizations. They came here specifically to target you, Sergeant Major Baxter. The use of his formal rank wasn't accidental. These men understood exactly who they were dealing with and the resources at his disposal. What's your assessment of the threat level going forward? CIA Section Chief Cooper asked. Neutralized, John replied simply. The networks that hired Darren Lockwood have been compromised. Their operational security is blown, their financial channels are exposed, and their key personnel are either dead or under surveillance. How can you be certain? John slid a tablet across the table, displaying intelligence reports that made all 3 officials pause. The data was comprehensive: bank records, communication intercepts, operational plans, and personnel files for dozens of foreign intelligence operatives. Where did you get this? Deputy Director Brock demanded. Darren Lockwood was very cooperative during his final interview. The euphemism wasn't lost on anyone in the room. They understood that John had extracted the intelligence through methods that wouldn't survive legal scrutiny, but the quality and scope of the information was too valuable to ignore. This intelligence identifies active foreign operations across 12 states, Colonel Rogers observed, scrolling through the data. If this is accurate, we're looking at the largest counterintelligence breakthrough in decades. It's accurate, John confirmed. I've had teams verify the most critical details. 3 foreign intelligence networks have been operating on American soil for over 5 years, targeting military personnel and their families. Section Chief Cooper looked troubled. Teams? What teams? Private contractors with appropriate security clearances and specialized skill sets. Men who understand that some problems require direct solutions. The implication was clear. John had been operating his own private intelligence network, conducting unsanctioned operations against foreign threats. The officials exchanged glances, recognizing both the legal complications and the practical value of such capabilities. We need to discuss your operational parameters going forward, Deputy Director Brock said carefully. What happened at the steel mill was effective, but it can't be repeated without proper authorization and oversight. John's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. Gentlemen, let me be clear about something. My daughter was tortured by foreign intelligence operatives operating on American soil. Your agencies either didn't know about the threat or couldn't stop it. I solved the problem using available resources and appropriate methods. Appropriate methods? Colonel Rogers raised an eyebrow. You killed 11 people without legal authority or official sanction. I eliminated 11 enemy combatants who were engaged in hostile operations against American citizens. The fact that they were operating on U.S. soil doesn't change their combatant status. Section Chief Cooper leaned forward. The legal system. The legal system would have spent months filing papers while foreign operatives continued targeting American families. How many more children would have been tortured while your lawyers debated jurisdiction and evidence requirements? The room fell silent as the officials processed John's argument. They understood the tactical reality. Conventional law enforcement was inadequate for dealing with professional intelligence operatives who understood legal loopholes and diplomatic protections. What are you proposing? Deputy Director Brock asked finally. I'm proposing that we establish a formal framework for dealing with domestic foreign intelligence threats. A specialized unit with appropriate legal authorities and operational flexibility. John activated a presentation screen, displaying organizational charts and operational protocols that he'd been developing during his flight back from Afghanistan. Joint Counterintelligence Task Force, he continued. Personnel drawn from military special operations, CIA, FBI, and selected private contractors. Mandate to identify and neutralize foreign intelligence operations targeting American citizens and infrastructure. Colonel Rogers studied the presentation with growing interest. This would essentially be a domestic special operations unit with broad authorities to conduct direct action against foreign threats. Exactly. No more waiting for legal processes while enemy operatives escape justice. No more bureaucratic delays while American families are targeted for intelligence gathering. Section Chief Cooper looked skeptical. Congress would never approve something like this. The legal oversight requirements alone. Congress doesn't need to approve what they don't know about, John interrupted. This would be a classified program, funded through existing black budgets, with operational security maintained through compartmentalized briefings. The three officials exchanged looks that conveyed volumes of unspoken communication. They were being offered a solution to a problem that had been growing for years. The increasing boldness of foreign intelligence services operating on American soil. Who would lead this task force? Deputy Director Brock asked. Someone with the operational experience to identify threats, the tactical skills to neutralize them, and the motivation to protect American families. John's smile was cold. Someone who's already proven that the mission can be accomplished. Colonel Rogers nodded slowly. You're volunteering to run a domestic assassination program. I'm volunteering to protect American citizens from foreign intelligence threats using whatever methods prove necessary and effective. The meeting continued for another 2 hours, covering operational details, legal frameworks, and political considerations. By the end, John had secured unofficial approval for his proposal, with the understanding that success would bring formal recognition and failure would result in complete disavowal. As the officials filed out, Section Chief Cooper lingered behind. This is about more than your daughter, isn't it? He asked quietly. John was quiet for a long moment. Emma's attack was personal, but the intelligence we recovered suggests dozens of other families have been targeted. Children threatened, spouses manipulated, military personnel compromised through psychological warfare operations. And you want to make sure it never happens again. I want to make sure that anyone who considers targeting American families understands the consequences. John's voice carried absolute certainty. Some deterrents only work when they're demonstrated convincingly. Later that evening, John sat beside Emma's hospital bed, reading her a story while she dozed fitfully. Her bandaged hand remained motionless on the blanket, a constant reminder of what foreign enemies were willing to do to American children. His secure phone buzzed with a message from Kirk Holt. Official authorization granted. Welcome to the Joint Counterintelligence Task Force. Your first target package will be delivered tomorrow. John smiled as he looked at his sleeping daughter. Emma would grow up in a world where people who hurt children face swift and permanent consequences. She would never again have to fear that her father's enemies could reach her with impunity. Some parents protected their children through conventional means, locks, alarms, legal restraints. John Baxter protected his daughter by ensuring that anyone who threatened her would disappear quietly and permanently. It was a harsh form of justice, but it was effective, and effectiveness was all that mattered when family was at stake. The hunter had found his new hunting ground, and the prey would soon discover that some predators never stopped pursuing their targets. Chapter 8. The Network Unravels. 6 weeks after the steel mill incident, John stood in a converted warehouse outside Denver that served as the operational headquarters for the Joint Counterintelligence Task Force. The space hummed with activity, analysts processing intelligence, operators planning missions, and technical specialists monitoring communications across multiple foreign intelligence networks. Emma was home now, her fingers slowly healing but her spirit intact. She'd started physical therapy and was already talking about learning martial arts so she could help Daddy fight the bad guys. John had hired private security for their home and Emma's school, ensuring that she could return to a normal childhood while he eliminated the remaining threats. Target Package Alpha is ready for final approval, Ollie O'Brien reported, placing a thick folder on John's desk. Russian intelligence network operating out of Aurora. 12 operatives confirmed, including the handler who contracted Darren Lockwood. John opened the file, studying photographs and intelligence reports on a cell that had been operating in Colorado for 3 years. Their primary mission had been identifying and compromising military personnel through family targeting, the same strategy that had led to Emma's torture. Rules of engagement, full spectrum response authorized. These operatives have been linked to the compromise of 17 American military families, including 3 cases of child endangerment. Ollie's expression was grim. They're using the same psychological warfare tactics that Lockwood employed, threaten the children to control the parents. John felt the familiar cold rage settling in his chest. Timeline. Simultaneous raids tonight at 0200 hours. Zach and Edgar are coordinating assault teams for the primary locations, while local law enforcement handles the secondary targets. The beauty of the new operational framework was its efficiency. Instead of months of legal proceedings that could be manipulated or delayed, foreign intelligence threats were identified and eliminated within weeks of discovery. The message to America's enemies was clear. Targeting American families would result in swift and permanent consequences. John's secure phone rang with a call from Detective Andre Jefferson, who had become an unofficial liaison between local law enforcement and the task force. John, we have a problem. Renee wants to speak with you about Emma's ongoing therapy. She's asking questions about the security arrangements, your new job, and why federal agents keep visiting her house. John sighed. His ex-wife had been struggling to process the revelation that her boyfriend had been a foreign spy who'd tortured their daughter for intelligence purposes. The psychological trauma was compounded by guilt over her unwitting cooperation with Lockwood's operation. What kind of questions? The kind that suggest she's been talking to lawyers about custody modifications. She thinks Emma would be safer living away from you, given the nature of your work. John felt a different kind of anger, not the cold operational rage he felt toward foreign threats, but the frustrated fury of a father whose parental rights were being questioned because he'd protected his daughter from torture. Schedule a meeting. Today, if possible. 3 hours later, John sat across from Renee in the same hospital conference room where they'd first discussed Emma's injuries. But the dynamic had changed significantly. Renee now understood that her ex-husband operated in a world of classified missions and life-or-death decisions. Emma's having nightmares, Renee began without preamble. She wakes up screaming about hammers and bad men. The therapist thinks she needs stability, predictability. She has stability, armed security, monitored communications, and the knowledge that the people who hurt her are dead. Renee flinched at John's casual mention of killing. That's exactly what I'm talking about. You've turned our daughter's life into some kind of military operation. I've ensured that our daughter will never again be tortured by foreign intelligence operatives. If that requires military-style security, then that's what she gets. For how long? The rest of her childhood? Her entire life? Renee's voice rose with frustration. She's 8 years old, John. She should be worried about homework and friends, not about whether Daddy's enemies might hurt her again. John studied his ex-wife's face, recognizing genuine maternal concern mixed with guilt over her role in Emma's endangerment. What are you proposing? Shared custody modification. Emma lives with me during the school year, visits you during holidays and summers, away from whatever it is you're doing now. And what exactly do you think I'm doing? Renee's expression grew troubled. I don't know, and that's what scares me. Federal agents won't discuss your current assignment. Detective Jefferson changes the subject when I ask about the steel mill incident. Emma talks about Daddy having special friends who watch our house. John was quiet for a long moment, weighing operational security against parental honesty. I hunt people who threaten American families. Specifically, I eliminate foreign intelligence operatives who target military personnel and their children. You're an assassin. I'm a counterintelligence specialist who uses direct action methods to neutralize foreign threats. Renee stared at him with a mixture of fear and fascination. How many people have you killed? Enough to ensure that Emma will never again face the kind of torture that Darren Lockwood inflicted on her. And that's supposed to comfort me? John leaned forward, his voice carrying absolute conviction. It should comfort you because it means our daughter is protected by someone who has the skills, resources, and motivation to eliminate anyone who threatens her. How many other 8-year-olds can say that? Before Renee could respond, John's phone buzzed with an urgent message from Edgar Davenport. Alpha operation compromised. One target escaped and is heading toward Emma's school. Immediate extraction required. John was on his feet instantly, his tactical mind shifting into combat mode. Where's Emma right now? At school. John, what's wrong? One of the foreign operatives we've been tracking just broke surveillance and is heading toward Emma's location. John was already calling for backup while moving toward the exit. I need you to call the school and tell them to implement lockdown procedures. Now, Renee went pale. This is exactly what I'm talking about. Your work is putting Emma in danger again. My work is the only thing that's kept Emma safe since Lockwood. John paused at the door, his expression softening slightly. Renee, these people were targeting our family long before I started hunting them. The only difference now is that I'm hunting them back. As John raced through Colorado Springs traffic toward Emma's elementary school, he coordinated with his tactical team through a secure radio. The escaped operative, a Russian intelligence officer named Alexei Volkov, had been part of the network that contracted Lockwood services. Phantom 6, this is Overwatch. Ali's voice crackled through the radio. Target is confirmed moving toward the school in a stolen vehicle. ETA 4 minutes ahead of your arrival. School security status? Lockdown initiated, but the building's perimeter is vulnerable. We have assets moving to intercept, but it's going to be close. John pushed his vehicle harder, weaving through traffic with the skills of someone who'd conducted high-speed pursuits through hostile territory. Every second counted when Emma's safety was at stake. His phone rang with a call from Emma's school principal. Mr. Baxter, we have Emma secured in the administrative office, but there's a man in the parking lot demanding to speak with her. He claims to be from Child Protective Services. Do not let him enter the building under any circumstances. Federal agents are en route. John could see the school now, along with a black sedan parked near the main entrance. Through his binoculars, he spotted Alexei Volkov approaching the building with what appeared to be official documentation, probably forged credentials designed to gain access to Emma. The Russian operative had made a critical tactical error. Instead of disappearing after his network was compromised, he decided to complete his original mission by targeting John's daughter directly. It was a mistake that would cost him his life. John parked 3 blocks away and approached the school through a drainage culvert that provided concealment while offering multiple firing positions. His suppressed rifle was already loaded with match-grade ammunition designed for precision shooting at extended range. Through his scope, John watched Volkov argue with school security while attempting to gain entry to the building where Emma was hiding. The man was desperate, probably aware that his escape routes were closing and his only leverage was terrorizing an 8-year-old girl. John's crosshairs settled on Volkov's center mass, his breathing steady and controlled. The shot would be taken at 150 meters with a slight crosswind and elevated firing position, well within his capabilities but requiring precise calculation. As Volkov pulled a weapon and began threatening school personnel, John squeezed the trigger with the calm expertise of 20 years' worth of precision shooting. The subsonic round struck Volkov in the chest, dropping him instantly without alerting nearby civilians to the gunshot. Target neutralized, John reported through his radio. Threat to Emma eliminated. As emergency vehicles converged on the school, John melted away from his firing position and returned to his vehicle. Emma would be safe now. The immediate threat was eliminated, and a message had been sent to any other foreign operatives who might consider targeting his family. But as he drove away from the scene, John realized that Renee had been partially correct. His work would always carry risks that could potentially endanger Emma. The question was whether those risks were greater than the certainty that foreign enemies would target her if he stopped hunting them. For John Baxter, the answer was simple. As long as people existed who would torture children for intelligence purposes, he would hunt them with professional efficiency and personal motivation. Emma deserved to grow up in a world where such monsters feared the consequences of their actions. And John would ensure that they learned those consequences through direct, personal experience. Chapter 9. The Final Lesson. 2 months later, John sat in Emma's hospital room as she completed her final physical therapy session. Her fingers had healed better than the doctors had initially predicted, though she would always bear scars from Darren Lockwood's hammer. But those scars had also taught her lessons about the world that most children her age would never understand. "Daddy, will the bad men ever come back?" Emma asked as the therapist finished wrapping her hand in a support bandage. "No, sweetheart. The bad men who hurt you are gone forever." "What about other bad men?" John considered his answer carefully. Emma deserved honesty, but she also deserved the innocence that Lockwood had tried to steal from her. There might be other bad men someday, but Daddy has friends who watch for them. And if they ever come near you, they'll discover that hurting little girls is a very dangerous mistake. Emma nodded with the solemnity of someone who'd learned that evil existed, but that good people fought back against it. "I want to learn to fight too, so I can help you stop the bad men. Someday, maybe. But for now, your job is to be 8 years old and let Daddy worry about the bad men." After Emma's session, John met with Detective Andre Jefferson to review the final reports on what was now being called the Foreign Intelligence Incursion. Official documents described a coordinated law enforcement operation that had resulted in the identification and elimination of multiple foreign intelligence networks operating in Colorado. 17 enemy operatives killed or captured, Jefferson reported. 3 complete foreign intelligence networks dismantled. Dozens of American military families no longer under threat. By any measure, this was a successful operation. What about the political fallout? Minimal. The Justice Department is treating this as a counterterrorism victory, and Congress is praising interagency cooperation. Nobody's asking uncomfortable questions about methods or body counts. John nodded with satisfaction. The Joint Counterintelligence Task Force had proven its effectiveness, and similar units were already being established in other major cities with significant military populations. "There is one complication," Jefferson continued, his expression growing troubled. "Renee's custody petition." John had been expecting this development. Despite Emma's recovery and the elimination of immediate threats, Renee remained convinced that John's profession made him an unsuitable primary guardian. "What's her argument?" "That your current work exposes Emma to ongoing dangers that outweigh the benefits of your protection. She's citing the school incident as evidence that your enemies will continue targeting Emma regardless of your security measures." And the court's initial response? "Judge is scheduled to hear arguments next week." "But John..." Jefferson paused. "Renee's lawyer has been asking questions about your military service, your current assignment, your methods for dealing with threats. They're trying to paint you as an unstable veteran who uses excessive violence to solve problems." John felt a familiar cold anger settling in his chest. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was being portrayed as dangerous by the woman whose negligence had enabled Emma's torture, while the man who'd eliminated that threat was facing potential loss of custody. "Schedule a meeting with Renee. Today." That afternoon, John found his ex-wife in the coffee shop where they'd first discussed their divorce years earlier. She looked tired, stressed, and older than her 34 years. The psychological aftermath of discovering she'd been manipulated by a foreign spy was still taking its toll. "I assume you want to discuss the custody petition," Renee said without preamble. "I want to discuss Emma's future and what kind of life you think she should have." Renee's expression hardened. "A normal life. Away from classified missions and federal agents and men with guns watching our house. A normal life where foreign intelligence operatives can target her with impunity because her father isn't hunting them first? That's not." Renee stopped, recognizing the validity of John's argument. There has to be a middle ground, some way to protect Emma without turning her childhood into a military operation. John leaned forward, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. "Renee, let me explain something about the world we live in. There are people, trained professionals, whose job is to identify American military personnel and exploit their vulnerabilities. They study our families, our children, our weaknesses. They use psychological warfare to compromise our operational effectiveness. I understand that. Do you? Because Darren Lockwood specifically targeted you and Emma to get to me. He tortured our daughter to extract military intelligence that would have resulted in American soldiers being killed overseas. That wasn't random violence. It was professional espionage conducted against an 8-year-old child." Renee's face went pale as the full implications hit her. "You're saying they'll never stop?" "I'm saying that as long as I'm involved in counterintelligence operations, Emma will remain a potential target for foreign enemies. But I'm also saying that she's safer with me than without me, because I have the skills and resources to eliminate those threats permanently." "And if you're killed? If one of your missions goes wrong, what happens to Emma then?" John was quiet for a long moment. It was a valid question. His profession carried inherent risks that could leave Emma orphaned or vulnerable to retaliation. "If I'm killed, Emma will be protected by the network of operators who've been working with me. Men like Ollie O'Brien, Zach Walton, Edgar Davenport. Professionals who understand that protecting her is protecting part of what makes us human." Renee stared at him with a mixture of admiration and horror. "You've built an entire organization around keeping our daughter safe. I've built an organization around keeping American families safe. Emma just happens to be the one I care about most." Before Renee could respond, John's secure phone buzzed with an urgent message from Kirk Holt. "Priority target identified. Iranian intelligence cell planning operation against military families in San Diego. Your task force is requested for immediate deployment." John showed the message to Renee, watching her expression as she processed the implications. "More children at risk," she said quietly. "More children who need someone willing to stop the monsters before they strike." Renee was quiet for several minutes, staring out the coffee shop window at the ordinary suburban street, where ordinary families lived ordinary lives, blissfully unaware of the predators who studied them from the shadows. "If I withdraw the custody petition," she said finally, "what guarantees do I have that Emma will be protected? You have my word that anyone who threatens her will face the same fate as Darren Lockwood and his associates." "That's not a legal guarantee, John. That's a promise of violence." John's smile was cold but genuine. "Sometimes those are the only guarantees that matter." That evening, John received confirmation that Renee had withdrawn her custody petition. Emma would remain with him, protected by the network of professional killers who'd sworn to defend American families against foreign threats. As he tucked Emma into bed that night, she looked up at him with the serious expression she'd developed since her ordeal with Lockwood. "Daddy, are you going to have to go away again to fight the bad men?" "Yes, sweetheart. But this time, I'm going to make sure they understand what happens to people who hurt children. So maybe after a while, there won't be as many bad men who need fighting." Emma nodded with 8-year-old wisdom. "Good, because I want other kids to be safe too." John kissed her forehead, marveling at the resilience and compassion that had survived her torture. Emma understood that her father's work was necessary, even if it was dangerous. She'd learned that some problems required violence to solve, but that violence in defense of innocence was different from violence for its own sake. As John prepared for deployment to San Diego, he reflected on the lessons of the past few months. Darren Lockwood had thought he could use psychological warfare against John's family without consequences. Foreign intelligence services had assumed that American military personnel would accept threats against their children as an unavoidable occupational hazard. Both assumptions had proven fatal. The Joint Counterintelligence Task Force was now operational in 6 major cities, with more units being established monthly. Foreign intelligence operatives were learning that targeting American families resulted in swift, permanent retaliation. The deterrent effect was already being measured in decreased threat assessments and reduced intelligence gathering operations against military personnel. John Baxter had transformed his personal tragedy into a strategic victory, using his daughter's suffering as motivation to protect thousands of other American families from similar attacks. Some fathers protected their children through conventional means. John Baxter protected his daughter by hunting the monsters that would prey on her, eliminating them with the clinical efficiency of a professional soldier and the passionate motivation of a father who'd seen what evil could do to innocence. Emma would grow up knowing that her father was a killer, but also understanding that he killed to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. She would learn that justice sometimes required violence, but that violence without justice was merely brutality. And she would never again have to fear that the monsters in the world could reach her without facing the consequences of crossing John Baxter. The hunter had found his purpose, and his prey would discover that some predators never stopped pursuing their targets until every threat to their family was permanently eliminated. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.